Everyone, welcome to another episode of OpsCast, brought to you by marketingops.com, powered by all those Mo Pros out there. I'm your host, Michael Hartmann, flying solo today. But joining me today is my guest, Dean De La Peña from Resonate, a company at the forefront of predictive consumer intelligence. Dean is the VP of Identity, Data Strategy, and SaaS, and brings a wealth of experience in helping marketers go beyond surface-level targeting to create meaningful, scalable, personalized experiences. So, Dean, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Yeah, let's do this. So we're going to start at the beginning, really, because I think the heart of what we're going to be talking about is personalization and what that really means in the context of AI, a world with AI. But when we think about this, how do you define personalization from a marketing context, and maybe what's the difference that you see that between what people aspire to do and what we actually see in practice these days?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question. I think of personalization as a really fulsome one-on-one conversation, getting to know the person that you're trying to message to, right? So, I think about it a little bit as like the holy grail of marketing. It's basically like, what if we were able to have a one-on-one conversation with everyone that we were trying to connect with, everyone that we're trying to engage, right? And if you think about having a one-on-one conversation with every adult in the US and you took an hour for that discussion, you'd learn a ton, and it would take you about 5 times the length of recorded human history, right? We don't have that kind of time. So, I think for really good reason, that's a daunting prospect. And because it's daunting, people have a tendency to fall back on what they know, right? So, I think the difference between what, ultimately we're aspiring to from a personalization context and what we see in practice, I think people tend to fall back on, hey, give me a sense for what the demographics are, what are some of the age and gender characteristics of the person that I'm trying to chat with, some other deterministic data, and I'll call it a day, right? And I think that's something that you can get your hands on easily. It's something you can get your head around, but it's not really answering that question of who are you? How can I engage with you? And at the end of the day, to me at least, personalization is really about adapting what we communicate and how we communicate to the specific person we're trying to talk to.
Yeah, with as much context as we understand. I was just kind of smiling for those who are not watching, that because I was thinking, like, most people probably think of personalization, victory is inserting first name into your email, your message, right? No, but I think what's really interesting that just struck me in what you described, and you said it from the beginning, is it's because I think a lot of people, me included, when I think of personalization, probably think of a single communication, right? And you talked about it as in terms of a conversation, as opposed to that. So, which is interesting, because that's like, that actually, I think, to me, like, mentally changes how I would think about it, right? If it's a one-time thing, like, it feels like there's like, almost feels even more daunting, right, to use your word, because you have to get it right in that one moment. Whereas if you think of it as one of many chances to try to understand that person, you could, like, maybe give yourself a little bit of leeway to assume, like, don't make assumptions about what you know, and you can change how you talk to somebody, and try to build more understanding.
Mm-hmm. Build more understanding and build a relationship, right?
Yeah.
It's like, if I think about my relationship with brands, and I'm a tough cookie. It's hard to get me to click into a digital advertisement. It happens.
Yep.
And, where I find many of the marketers that are engaging me are most successful is when they really are connecting with me. They know generally what I care about, and they're building a message, right? And, I think historically we've seen that, not from a digital perspective, and over time you'll see linear TV campaigns, right? And those campaigns will evolve over time. And once they have the message firmly established and they've got the catchphrase in your head, and, people are excited about that, they'll build on that. Like, I think about the, many years ago, there's, the Bud Light commercial, and I'm not affiliated with Bud Light anyway, right? But just, I'm thinking about this as an example.
So funny, because I was thinking about a Bud Light series that just popped up recently in one of my social feeds.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I remember Here We Go. and if I think about that message of action and, enjoying yourself and like having a lot of fun. And I remember that once they really established that, they were starting to transition that into more of like, hey, we have a dog and the dog's name is We Go. And it's like, here we go. And the dog would bring you a beer and everybody's having a lot of fun,
Right.
Parties. And it's that kind of consistent message. If you can do that, understanding who the person is you're trying to talk to, you're actually building that much more one-to-one relationship and that engagement over time, which is how you delight your consumers, how you, really change how they perceive you and your brand and engage with you over time.
Well, and to me, like this taps into human nature, right? That's how I think we build actual human connection anyway, right? Is like it takes time and it takes some consistent effort to build that, because what you're trying to build is trust, right? And that's
exactly,
it's a tough thing to do. So I'm curious, and like my guess is anybody listening to this, any marketer, any marketing ops person is going to go like, yeah, that sounds right, or at least in the right track. Like why do you think we've all kind of collectively missed the mark or come below where we think we should be for trying to do personalization?
Great question. I think there's two parts to my answer to it. The first is more of a historical view and recognizing that, technology is a really important part of it, right? And I think historically marketers have been limited in their ability to think about and answer the right questions that create the underpinning for that really strong relationship, right? Because we're basically trying to ask the question and answer, you are a specific consumer, Michael, like, are you in the market for my product? Do we share similar values? Can I engage you on those values? Do you want me to engage you on those values? Like, is that something that you actually do want this messaging, and what's the right message for you specifically, right? And that's been really hard for a long time. We've traditionally relied again on data that I'll talk a little bit later about asking the right question. And we're kind of asking the wrong question if we're just looking at age and income. And I think we've fallen back on some of those characteristics. And historically, you'd find the regions geographically, or you'd find broad segments of consumers that generally met the kind of the vibe, right? Or the set of characteristics that you were trying to engage with. Like, you had a strategy, you knew who your consumer kind of was. So let me find a group where a lot of those people probably live. And then I'll go and I'll scattershot, I'll peanut butter my marketing to that group.
Peanut butter, I love it. Peanut butter my marketing.
Exactly. Peanut buttered marketing. And the idea, and that works, right? You hope you capture as much attention and interest as you can, but that really falls afoul of, the old John Wanamaker quote. I know 50% of my marketing dollars work. Trouble is, I don't know which half, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so, it's just an inefficient approach. You're not really engaging, and if you don't know the specific individual, you're lucky. You're lucky, not intentional, if you are creating that kind of one-on-one relationship. And I think, that's the technology side of it. Now, technology's come a long way. Yeah. Analytics has come a long way, right? And the predictive AI, people's ability to create really intelligent machine learning models and predictive AI, that's become a reality now, right? And as the technology of analytics has advanced, I think the problem now is that people are asking the wrong questions. And I think some of that comes from, our collective historical experience, what used to be the art of the possible. And obviously times are changing quickly, but I think, that's really where I counsel many of my clients and folks within my marketing sphere is be asking the right question. And that's where, if we ask the right question and we build the technology to answer that question, we're going to have a lot more success.
So, do you think that's what differentiates how you approach this? Like, if so, what do you mean by asking the wrong questions versus the right questions?
Yeah, that's fantastic. So there's a really good quote that I think about a lot from a guy named John Tukey. He's a statistician, since passed, but he wrote a book, I think, The Future of Data Analytics, back in the 60s. And so this is back in the 60s, right? This is way before, modern technology, digital marketing, any of it. And the quote is, far better an approximate answer to the right question, which is often vague, than an exact answer to the wrong question, which can always be made precise, right? So instead of saying, look, I want to, find the general age group. Like I know that, the people who are engaging on my product are typically 25 to 35-year-old female on the West Coast, whatever that is, right? That's not really the right question. The right question is, are you specifically going to engage on my message and be excited about the opportunity to purchase my product, have a conversation with me, to build a relationship with my brand, right? So, we tackle that head on using Ray, the predictive AI that we've built over a decade and, more than $100 million at this point of investment in that AI. And we use that AI along with consented consumer online behavior. And that lets us really have that one-on-one conversation at scale, right? So the question you asked, like, what is the right question? In my mind, is really deeply understanding people's intent, their motivations, their values, what makes you tick. And what differentiates us is our ability to line that up with their behavior and use AI to scale that so that we have a really good sense for, hey, based on how you act, and again, based on consented data, right? Privacy protected, careful about that. Based on how you're acting, we can make an assessment of what you care about. And we've seen really strong results in connecting that ultimately to
Okay,
market.
so I think I'm following the pushback, maybe not pushback, but I think what I'm hearing though is a little bit different than asking the right question. I guess what question are we trying to answer as opposed to asking the right question to the consumer, right? That's one. But the other part is, what I heard you describing what we're looking for, you essentially said we look at behaviors rather than what people tell us. Is that kind of part of it too?
A bit of both. We look at behavior to understand based on what several, and I'll talk a little bit about kind of how our secret sauce works and how we do this, but we ask people what they care about. We talk to the consumer, and we also understand how many of them behave and can connect that behavior, which we have for everyone, to really understand the intents and motivations of the individuals that we haven't spoken to directly, right? And so, to maybe one way for me to analogize and clarify what I had highlighted about, asking the right question, understanding the consumer in a different way than I think we have historically. Yeah. If I think about, let's say that I shift from more of a marketing perspective to a sales perspective, and I want to sell you, Michael. Like, I'm a clothing retailer, a fashion retailer. Okay. And I want to talk to you, Michael, specifically about, whether I can get you excited about my product. I'm going to have a conversation with you, right? And as we're having today, right, I get to ask you questions about what you care about, understand generally how you feel, take a look at what you're wearing, right? Which is going to tell me a lot about, your fashion, what you care about. I might, as an example, see you walk out of the gym. And if you walk out of the gym, even if you're wearing street clothes, I bet you make a pretty solid guess that you were just wearing athletic gear, that you care about athletic clothing or athleisure clothing, right? And that's really powerful. The traditional approach would be to look at you from afar down the street. I don't know anything about you. I don't know your name. And to just get a sense of what you look like, right? How old do I think you are? What's your gender?
What zip code are you in? Right.
What zip code are you in? Like, I see you down the street, right? So I know you're in the general area. But I'd much rather talk to you, learn about you, see how you react to questions that I'm asking. And that's just so much more powerful in how we can engage and connect with, right? It's that connection with the consumer than more of that distant view of some of the facts that don't matter as much, when we think about what people care about and how they purchase.
The reason I asked you the question is because I think, so two parts. One, I started my career in marketing and in database marketing. So even back then, right, the volume of data that was available sort of stunned me, and it's only increased. But the bigger thing to me is that I I get a little skeptical about when we ask questions of consumers to get their input because of two things. One, sometimes people just flat out lie, right? I mean, I think that's the case. We've probably all done it to some degree just to get past the gate. Or probably more prevalent is we answer things the way we think that we should to or what we believe we do it, but our behavior actually does something different. The example I go to is if you ask people about how much they care about their online privacy, virtually everyone's going to say, absolutely, I don't want my stuff shared, blah, 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 blah. But then nobody actually reads, end user license agreements for all these online apps that are consuming all this data and generating all these insights about you, right? And so that's why the trade, because they're consciously or not, they're assessing the trade-off of I'm willing to give up that what I care about, right? It's not that they don't care about the privacy piece, but on the other hand, right, there's a lot of benefits and convenience that comes with letting go of that to some degree, so that I can have one-click purchase or one-click subscribe or whatever, right? So that's why I was asking the question about: are we asking questions of people? Are we looking at behavior, or is it some combination of both, right?
No, I think you raise great points, right? And I also don't think you're wrong. What people do as opposed to what they say they do or are going to do can sometimes be different. Yeah. But, our observation, and this is borne out in the results that we get with our clients and their ability to really move the needle on better marketing, more efficient marketing, more effective marketing, higher return on your ad spend, right? Is that by and large, people are answering questions in good faith. They're trying to do their best.
I actually do think that's true too, right?
Yeah.
And I see that in when I've had, this is more of a B2B context, but gated forms for accessing content, for example, and you have optional questions. I'm always stunned at how much people still fill that out, and they fill it out in a way that is actually mostly truthful.
Yeah, mostly truthful. And I think, the other piece of it too is that's where I get back to why I like that Tukey quote so much, right? Better to ask the right question and get the approximate answer than the wrong question precisely. Yeah. I think there's some noise in that, right? And with really good predictive AI, with good modeling and analytical techniques, you can sort through that noise and get a really useful value-driving answer that might be a little bit imperfect, right? We're not necessarily going to get that question right every single time.
Sure.
But again, I would so much rather know if I give you a nudge and I connect with you with my messaging, you're going to buy my product. And I know that correctly 80% of the time. I'd way, way rather know that than know with 100% certainty that you're male.
Right. Yeah. So I think that's a good clarification. I'm glad we kind of wrestled through that. So you guys do mostly B2C work, right?
So we are typically working with marketing agencies and brands. So a little bit more B2B2C.
Okay. But ultimately, you're helping.
We're helping marketers connect with the consumer. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So I just want to make that clarification, because I mean, it's not that I don't think it applies to B2B, because I do think many B2B marketers should be thinking more like B2C marketers, particularly when it comes to targeting, messaging, the whole bit. But that's a whole separate topic of its own. But I'm just curious. So, I'm bought into this idea, asking better questions, even if the answers maybe are not as precise, is better to inform your targeting and messaging, and are you hitting the right people at the right time? Mm-hmm. It's what are some of those inputs and signals that help you and your clients identify the people that are better fits for whatever their product or service they're selling?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so, the most important input, again, is for a subset of individuals, right? We're not asking 250 million people. I just talked about how that would take us, just untenably long to do. But we do ask these questions of consumers, right? What are your motivations? Are you in the market to buy a variety of specific products? How do you feel about certain issues, right? More about who you are. We get to that level of depth. And then, we're also I think traditionally, right, if you're doing that kind of survey and you think from a market research perspective, you take that and you build out panel insights.
Yep.
doesn't get you that far, right? Like that's part and parcel of the old challenges with personalization where, okay, now I've got my panel insights that helps me guide my creative a little bit, but what I really care about is finding that person and connecting with them and who they are, and that's where that falls short.
It kind of
And so
gets you
that's
to the
where
ability to do a persona, which is an amalgamation of something that tries to, yeah, so I get it.
exactly. And so what we're able to do then is with the AI and with, again, the consented online behavior, like we're not talking, we're talking like big data at this point, right?
Absolutely.
Billions of signals that help us understand, the behavior across the consumer base in the US, adult consumer base in the US, and then using Ray to connect those dots. And again, like the way I kind of think about that from a human perspective is, again, being able to assess a lot about, a friend of yours, or if you meet someone new, but you have the opportunity to sit down across a dinner table from them, you'll learn a lot about them, right? You'll learn
Sure.
about kind of who they are in a much better way than just some of like the basic deterministic facts. And if you think about what predictive AI is doing, it's making those connections between behavior and underlying intent, motivation, preferences at scale. It sees so much more than we do with our hundreds or thousands of acquaintances. And it just is able to develop basically, you can think of it as a lot of practice, right? Of just being able to kind of link those things.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we can't have a conversation, it feels like these days, without talking about AI. I think when you and I talked before, you talked about something to me combines two things that I haven't seen together a whole lot, although I'm bullish on it, I guess, and you called it predictive AI, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm familiar with the idea of predictive analytics, which is hard on its own. And then it sounds like predictive AI is combining that with kind of AI to either assist in that or generate different kind of insights based on some sort of an analyst. Talk to me about what that means. Like, what is predictive AI and how are you using that?
I'm really glad you asked that question because I think I think it's getting lost in the zeitgeist right now. So I think of predictive AI and generative AI as two parts of the same whole, right? And generative AI is what's buzzy right now. We think of ChatGPT, Claude, Grok, right? All of these different, primarily chat-based interfaces where you can ask a question and get back a very fulsome answer. Not always exactly correct, but
Right.
Certainly it really helps speed up traditional research, putting ideas together, language, right?
Right.
And that's obviously come a tremendously long way. But that generative AI part of the world is, I see that as a tremendous workflow enhancer. It's an efficiency enhancer. It helps to pick up tasks that we used to have to do manually. I used to have to write an email manually. I used to have to, put together my thoughts on X, Y, and Z or do proofreading manually, right? And coding used to have to be done. Like you had to get that out of your fingers on the keyboard, right? You didn't have Claude to help, do 80% of the heavy lifting for you. And that's incredibly valuable. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't do what the deep learning neural net modeling and the, like the extreme gradient boosting nonlinear modeling that allows you to take these massive data sets and make sense of them and translate that into predictions of who these individual consumers are with a tremendous degree of accuracy that lets us connect with them where they are. And so, increasingly from a software perspective, and not just from our ability to assess kind of who consumers are, but for our ability to help our clients get really efficient, good use out of that information to connect that directly to the DSP or the social media and the digital targeting that our clients are able to do. Generative AI has been enormously helpful at sitting on this Ray asset that we have in predictive modeling to help our clients really make that happen efficiently, directly, automatically.
Yeah, I mean, to me, what I said I've been bullish about that as a potential thing is because when I was in database marketing at a big telecom company, but we actually had what today would be called data scientists, but they were doing predictive analytics modeling for different kinds of things, right? Churn, likelihood to buy, et cetera, et cetera. Um, but the way I think about it, as I understood the process, right, there would have to be some sort of prediction they had, like almost like scientific method. They have a hypothesis. They're going to go through a bunch of data. They're going to do some modeling, see if their hypothesis was true, and then turn that around into a predictive model. The piece that like the piece that I feel like this AI stuff could do is not totally eliminate the need for the hypothesis part, but like because it's like it could comb through these large volumes of data and look for identify patterns that we may not otherwise, be able to do without, with manual efforts, limits on technology, and so on. And so to me, like that's like I am excited about that as a possibility. I still stand by I still think you need humans in the middle of it, at least for the near future, because it may. In fact, we had a guest on, um, one one guest on recently who talked about like if you were to put some of these AI models in for say best customers, um, it's going to tell you like people who returned stuff, right, are great to target, and it's like, well, no, they return stuff, so it's not really um, not great. So anyway, so that's what I'm bullish about that, but I don't know what else to do there. I think I'm curious about that. So you also mentioned to me that you have a large scale consumer study. You've kind of hinted at that. Yeah. How is that? How do you tie that together with the predictive AI? And I think you called it Ray. That is Ray, the predictive AI modeling engine.
Yes. Yeah. So the survey that we run, so it's the U.S. consumer study. It's ours. It's proprietary, right? And that's what helps us really get deep on understanding of individual consumers. There are a lot of and really the power of Ray is our ability to connect the dots between this deep understanding of some consumers, broad spectrum behavior and demographics, and an ability to say, all right, for everyone who we haven't asked, or for everyone who we haven't talked to, or for everyone we don't have data on, sort of that dependent variable, that outcome that we're trying to understand, can we actually predict that outcome for everyone else, right? So that's the key. And the consumer study is essentially how one of the ways, in many ways, the deepest way that we can create some of that truth, that ground truth data at scale, right? Where we actually say, look, like, let's ask you, right? If we don't know, what motivates you, if we don't know that, you are really uncertain about the economy and how it's unfolding, or you are totally excited about the direction that, the economy is taking right now, and you feel very confident and sure in your spending habits, we don't know that you are about to have significant family milestones, and that's going to change how you interact with the world writ large, including how you purchase and what you care about.
Sure.
We ask, right? And again, it's that ability to be able to, that gives us a lot of control over the depth of question and the depth of insight that we can create. And again, of course, right? And, looming in all of this conversation is privacy and the ethics and regulation around making sure that, we're doing right by the consumer, that we're connecting with them when they want to be connected with and not otherwise, right?
Sure.
That survey, obviously people choose to take that. They choose to provide us that benefit of understanding. And that's, an important part of kind of the overall process as well.
Gotcha. Makes sense. All right. So all this, this making sense to me. Can you talk maybe about some real examples of where this has generated, results that you can talk about that are measurable, ideally, right, with some of your either clients or even on your own?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you one example. Obviously sanitized to protect the innocent here, but
It's
really
Bud Light. It's Bud Light, isn't it?
Bud Light, yeah, exactly. No, it's not. I will say, I'll give you the negative. This is not Bud Light. We have worked with one client in specific where, they are using the benefit of our one-to-one understanding of the consumer as they are engaging on customer acquisition, right? They're trying to recruit a specific type of consumer. Like they know where they're strongest, they know where they're weakest, and they know who they need to be having a conversation with, right? And
Sorry, how do they know that? I'm curious. Like, is it because they have it analyzed their customer base and know what that looks like, both in terms of like profile demographic type stuff as well as other characteristics, maybe behavior based, things like that?
yeah, I'd say, in three broad spectrum ways, right? The first is, they understand the trends in the market in general. So just from a very umbrella strategic perspective, let's say as an example, you're in the food and bev industry. And this client actually is in the food and bev industry. And you know that Ozempic, Wegovy, some of these, these are increasingly impacting people's relationship with food.
Sure.
How they spend, how much they spend, how it changes their habits and their behaviors, right? Understanding that and building that in. There's the second piece of it, which is kind of one layer deeper, which is more of a study of how the demographics around their industry are changing and what they care about. And the third piece is the layer deeper than that, which they're actually using our understanding of the consumer to develop a much more targeted, much clearer analysis of who is still in the market and who's not. So, it's not just our ability to connect the consumer. The most important part is our ability to connect the consumer and the brand.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also the element of helping the brand actually understand the nuances of that consumer and
Sure.
who is best to, have that conversation with, right? But then in enabling them to execute their digital marketing to the right group of people in a much more focused, thoughtful way, and to develop messaging that makes sense and is, again, just more laser focused, it's more engaging, right? They've seen a 38% increase in their engagement metrics as a result, right? Relative to their incumbent approach without the benefit of our understanding of the consumer. And, when you think about that, I mean, that's a big number, but it also makes sense because it's the difference between somebody, talking at you, right? You don't care what they have to say. It's not relevant to your interests, to somebody who like really hits you between the eyes with, oh my God, I really do care about that. I was just thinking about, and so I'll give you an example from my personal life. I am newly a pretty avid cyclist. I live in the city of Chicago.
Okay.
And I was walking down the street back to my house one day, 2 Octobers ago. And there's a bike store that was closing down. And as I am walking past the bike store, like as I'm walking up to the storefront on my way home, I was thinking to myself, it's a beautiful day. This walk is taking too long. I would love a bike. I really should think about buying one. And I turn my head to the left and I see we're going out of business. All of our frames, 45% off, get them while they last. Now that's purely serendipitous, right? That is luck, right? Yeah. They obviously, they were on hard times and they needed to shift their business model. And so they were selling their bikes at a discount. But that was a great example of right message, right time. And I'm now the proud owner of a weirdly bright blue Bianchi bicycle.
Right.
And you know what? It's an awesome bike. It's also one of the last few frames that they had in the shop, right?
Yeah.
Because it was so compelling to me in that moment. That was what I was looking for. I'd had the thought and it just connected the dots. And that's the power of really knowing in near real time what your consumers are thinking. Hey, if some of the consumers out there are concerned about impending tariffs, right?
Sure.
And they buy a lot of French wine, or they buy products from their home country or a country that is well known for Japanese ceramics, whatever it might be.
Sure.
I think a lot of people probably purchased ahead of tariffs. Actually, I saw an article in the journal recently about Swiss watches. Swiss watches are not cheap to start with, and if you're adding a tariff to that, they're going to get more expensive. And so you actually saw in the economic data an uptick in people purchasing at that moment. And knowing who is and isn't aware of those dynamics, who is and isn't in the market for that, it starts to become pretty easy to see how you can drive 35, 38, 40, 45% increases in ROAS and engagement by finding that individual right when they're ready to make the purchase.
Yeah, makes sense. Two questions are totally unrelated. So let's go with one first. So okay. So the idea here, it sounds like, is trying to replicate that sort of serendipitous, real life experience to an online digital experience.
Mm-hmm.
So can you go a little deeper on how that works?
Sure. I mean, it boils down to being able, and again, given the consent associated with it, being able to identify what makes a consumer tick when they are in the process of the, digital bid, right? So it's like when you're seeing the banner ads on, your edition of the Wall Street Journal or wherever it is that you're online, or you're, getting advertisements on TikTok or social media, making that connection at that moment and realizing that that's what you care about, right? And so it's about making this understanding of who the consumer is, what they care about in that moment, how they work, and connecting the dots kind of at that specific moment where they are ready to essentially consume that or related content, and doing that through the DSP, SSP, and the digital marketing process.
Gotcha. I mean, is it tailoring messaging too to some degree, or is there sort of like we've got maybe not 3 messages, but we've got 3,000 messages, right? And it's a little more focused.
Yeah, I think it's a question of tailoring messages, and it's tailoring timing.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, one of the things that we had talked about, I think when we talked last, Michael, was around, segmentation versus one-on-one marketing. And
yes.
I kind of see it as tool for the job, right? Segmentation is still really valuable. And I think building your segments off of a really deep understanding of individual consumers and building that up into groupings that help you, kind of get a sense for the gestalt, helps you create the creative. It helps you strategize. It helps you maximize your reach. It breaks out the broader spectrum strategic consumer group you care about into chunks that are manageable to the human brain, right? To your point, humans are and will continue to be part of this process. Really important for us to understand how we each, how other humans view the world, what's going to land to build that creative process. Like, I personally believe, even as a technologist and someone who's been in AI for 15 years, I really believe that humans stay a critical part of that. Mm-hmm. And our ability to help them kind of make those connections faster is really the kind of core of the game.
Yeah. All right. So my second question is really, so this is consumer focused. I'm trying to think of how this would potentially be analogous in a B2B world. And so one of the things, in fact, we just talked about this in a recent podcast, something like the anatomy of a deal, right? So looking at, here's a deal we won last quarter, right? Here are all the touch points across sales, marketing, whatever, right? Including digital ones. And that could be like, I think your point, like that's why I was asking the question about like, how did that client you talked about understand what a good customer looked like, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's the analogous there. And then kind of going from there, typically B2B buying doesn't happen by an individual, right? Very often it's a group, right? So could something like what you're describing also be adapted to look at it from that standpoint, or is it really dependent on this like ongoing survey, et cetera, that you're doing where you're gathering additional input from people? Or do you think that individual consumer stuff could apply in the B2B world as well?
Yes, to the entire
mic drop there. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to, I believe the answer to, the sort of overarching question of, is this valuable in different contexts, B2C, B2B? The answer to that question is yes. I'm going to reframe it just a little bit by abstracting again the notion of, hey, is it like the consumer survey that helps us create some of this data at scale, or is it, all these other pieces? It's more about the principles at play and the technologies of being able to use, and it takes a lot. It's hard to develop these modeling technologies, these neural net, nonlinear models, the analytical techniques required to take data set A, right? These predictable characteristics of, are we likely to win the deal with XYZ business, or who is expected to be a really good business that we want to be working with, and we want to, prospect and try to attract from a marketing perspective, and the data points that make that so. And so, I guess the questions that I would ask from a B2B perspective, and I've lived that world in the past, more from a sales perspective than a marketing perspective, but how do we talk to other businesses, and how do we, kind of connect those dots and show the value that we can provide? What makes a good client? It's like, it boils down to, the extent to which their strategy aligns with the product that you're providing. Are you a nice to have versus a need to have for them? And, what in general has been their perspective? Like, are they a company that is renowned for finding the best technology and deploying it? Or are they a company that is much more, careful with their investments and very tight knit? Are they a company that likes to build things themselves, right? These are all the key data points that I would use in my own head as a human to decide whether, that's a good opportunity. And those are the kind of data points that you'd want to be able to collect, broadly speaking, for some of these businesses to help you as a machine learning expert build the AI to make those determinations. And so from that perspective, and from our perspective, right, where we are generally most helpful is in this really complex, like we focused on this really complex problem of people. And so, to your point, right, the survey is a part of that. There's no intrinsic reason why you can't start to collect that kind of information for businesses and apply the same general approach. That make sense?
Okay. Yeah. And that's kind of what I assumed. It was like, just because I know a large portion of our audience is primarily B2B, and I think it's good for them to hear about some of these things that go on in the B2C world, because the scale is significantly higher, right? Like just so that it's interesting to me. Mm-hmm. All right, so maybe one last thing before we wrap up. I mean, you've touched on this a little bit. You brought up the point about privacy and compliance and that kind of stuff. Clearly, right, this kind of volume of data, there's potential risks and concerns about privacy. Like, how do you handle that? How do you balance that, right, between like the goals to help your clients achieve what they need to, while also being respectful of the people whose information you've got responsibility for?
I love that question, and in part because I'm a bit of a privacy nut. Right. So, I'm the guy that rejects all cookies all the time, uses the Apple, the Apple iPhone, private relay proxy, right? Like, I operate, very much in that. And so I come from the perspective that I really want others to respect my own choices from that perspective. And that's really what it starts with, is being respectful, ethical, and privacy first, right? So that's step one. You toe that line. And in fact, actually, we even go further than that, because, as we think about the kind of data sizes that you're talking about, and being careful with and good stewards of that data, right, we rely on technology that includes vector embeddings, as an example, which basically takes a data set that, even if it's massive, actually, especially if it's massive, would otherwise be human readable, and turns that into something that is condensed, actually easier for a machine to use, easier for a model to understand, and completely unintelligible to the human. It's gobbledygook, right? So it really starts with, focusing on consented data, right? Using data that consumers allow for the use to connect them. Because, to your point, right? Consumers actually want the value.
Absolutely.
Where I do give up my kind of privacy rights is Google Maps is a great example.
Yeah.
Where I turn on the GPS and I let them know everywhere that I go and track that in history because it's extraordinarily useful, right? And as we are helping brands connect with consumers that want that connection, that want that message, we want to make sure that we're doing that. But that starts with making sure that the data that we use is consented. Our survey, of course, is double consented. And in where there are sensitivities, where on a state by state basis, right, where hey, we're not allowed to use certain data for certain purposes for any reason, making sure that we always have the appropriate constraints and guardrails there to protect ourselves and our clients.
No, that's great. No, I mean, it sounds to me like really like it's a guiding principle, right? That would be the term for you as an organization, yes. And so that's great.
The other thing too, Michael, actually on that note, before we close out on that topic, right? I think the elephant in the room is that makes it harder, right? Because as people want privacy, it's harder to actually make that connection. It's harder to sort through the data, and that's a real differentiator for us. Is our ability to still drive the kind of results that we're seeing with our clients, and to get the clarity. Not always right? Like 80% confidence that we're getting the right answer, answering the right question, but that. Our ability to do that well and accurately and precisely, I think really sets us apart in a market where that problem is increasingly difficult to manage.
Yeah, that makes sense. All right, so we do need to probably wrap up here, but just before we move on, is there anything that we like you want, like anyone listening or watching this walks away from this, like one key point that we may not have covered that you want to make sure they heard, or we covered everything?
I think we've covered about everything. I mean, I think just the advent of data science and how it's connecting to the human experience and helping us, kind of have that more fulsome conversation, that fulsome human conversation, right? Yeah. Where AI is really propping up how we as people talk to each other and engage in the right ways at the right times. That's what I'm about, and I think it's really cool that we have the opportunity as Resonate to support that focus, and that I have the opportunity to talk to you about it today. So I really appreciate the time.
Fantastic. All right. Well, so let's move. If people want to learn more, because I'm sure we didn't actually cover everything, but like if they want to learn more, or connect with you, or hear more about what you're doing, what's the best way for them to do that?
You can always find me on LinkedIn. Shoot me an email. Happy to chat.
All right. Perfect. That sounds great. Well, Dean, again, thank you. This has been a fun conversation. It's kind of taking me back to my roots in database marketing and consumer stuff. So it's always fun to go and think about that. Thanks also to our longtime and first-time guests and listeners, or listeners and supporters. We always appreciate that. If you have suggestions for topics or guests, or want to be a guest, you can always reach out to Mike, Naomi, or me, and we would be happy to get started on that. Until next time, bye, everybody.